Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. Now if you saw the thumbnail, you'll see that today I'm going to talk about Avicularia. Now they're one of my favourite genus of New World tarantulas, but they do have a reputation for being quite hard to look after. So thought I would just put together a little video on how I care for mine. Now right from small slings right through. And hopefully, if you're thinking of getting an avic and you're a little bit nervous, hopefully this video will help you out a little bit. So one of the first things to consider, and one of the things which is talked about the most with avics, is cross ventilation. Now, if you think about where arboreal tarantulas live, there's a lot more airflow. Not necessarily, they don't live in the treetops as such, but they do live off the ground. So there's a lot more airflow off the ground than than the forest floor. So what we want to do is create an environment where it does have humidity, but the humidity rises and escapes, and more fresh air comes in. So you just want that air exchange. So for that reason, starting with spiderlings, I don't like to use sling pots personally. Now I know a lot of people swear by sling pots for all slings, but for avics I don't really like using them. Now the main reason is because if you make them a little bit too wet inside, they just do not dry out, and it's quite hard to put a decent amount of holes in there for it to dry out. So you can imagine if there was too much water in the bottom there, could very quickly become a really stifling environment. So for that reason, I'm not really a huge fan of these for avics. Now for small spiderlings, I prefer to use something just a little bit bigger. Now it's not much taller than a sling pot, but it does have more diameter, but it's still small enough, that the spiderling can find its food okay. But it's it's big enough that you can have a little bit of fun, put a bit of cork bark in there. And now you can see that in this one I don't have a water dish, just have a nice big bit of moss on one side, and I find that works really well for small avic slings. Now I just pop a little bit of water on there once a week on the moss, but the rest of the enclosure I keep dry. So I do find that works quite well. Now as they get slightly bigger, you can go on to slightly bigger containers. Now this one, it did have a water dish. I've just taken it out briefly just to clean it up. But you can see it's just slightly bigger, but it's now big enough that you can put a water dish in there. Now in this one here, I have an arboreal. Now these guys, as you can see, they web absolute like crazy. So I do have a water dish in there, but it's sitting right on top of the webbing there. So not really worth putting one anywhere else because it just disappears. So but yeah, I'm going to open this one up actually because it's quite a funny little spiderling, this one. It does come up quite a lot. So it seems sort of strangely intelligent, this tarantula. So but yeah, let's have a little look at this guy.
Now, true to form, almost as soon as I took the top off, this little spiderling came up to the top. It always seems to do this. Now, if you noticed here, it's webbed right to the very top of the container, but there is still enough room to put a little water dish there. But, if you can't get a water dish in there, don't panic, because remember, this is a young spider, so it's a very temporary enclosure. So you can get just a little bottle like I've got at the side here. Now this bottle is actually a crafting bottle, and just you can just pop a little bit of water on top of the webbing a couple of times a week. So yeah, don't panic if you can't quite get a water dish in there. I say this is a very temporary setup, but one thing with avics is they do seem to poo a lot more than other tarantulas. So obviously sometimes they will defecate in the water dish as well. But you can see by the plump abdomen there, this little one's in good condition. Now, one of the next hotly debated topics when it comes to avic care and arboreal care in general is the mesh top enclosures. Now, I do personally keep the mesh tops on there. Now, I know some people do replace them, so I suppose at the end of the day, it's your choice. But never personally had a problem with them. So humidity also is another big thing with your avics. Now the good thing about the mesh top is the humidity can escape, so the enclosure can also dry out if it needs to. So whether you should have your water dish on the floor or up high is very much, a matter of opinion as well. You can see in this one here, I have one on the floor and one up high. Now, a lot of people will say that, avics or arboreals don't come down to the ground, but I have seen them come down the glass and drink from the big water dishes. So if you have them butted up against the side there, they will find them. And you can see, with any tarantula really, they're very active at night time. So, chances are they do come down to the floor quite often, but we just don't see them. But also with your humidity, having live plants, it can also really help the humidity, because not only do the plants give off humidity, but also when you water them as well. So you don't have to have live plants. You can bung a bit of moss in there, but I do like to have them. Now, temperament wise, your avics across the board, they generally are quite docile spiders, but they can be quite nervous sometimes. So it's very, very important to have a nice, bit of cork bark, so they can, make a nice retreat. So somewhere for them to hide. Now, quite often I will put a bit of black backing on here, just so they feel a little bit more secure. So you can see this one here has hunkered down behind and created itself a nice little hideaway there. So it's something that's really important with avics. I've seen them in pet shops before with terrestrial setups with nowhere to hide. So definitely not a good situation. Now, with regards to avics and their speed, now one of the things that makes them very endearing is this strange comical slow motion walk. But don't let that fool you, because avics, like any arboreal tarantula, they can jump, they can be extremely agile, and they can really shift when they want to. So when you rehouse avics, sometimes they can almost be quite curious, and they're quite often they will go for a bit of a wander. So you can see that down here on the left hand side. Quite recently, one of my Aminatrix got out during a rehouse and just went for a little bit of a wander. So, but generally, they are easy to catch up again, because they don't run around for long. They do tend to go back to this slow motion walking.
So I hope you've enjoyed my little avic care video today. Now the thing with any tarantula is, they can pass, and it's not necessarily something that you've done wrong. Sometimes it can be genetic, just as people, we don't always live the same amount of time. But, there's definitely things that you can do, to speed up their demise. So it's just a case of, keeping an eye on your tarantulas, keeping up with your care, because although tarantulas, generally they are very easy to look after compared to other animals, you know, you do still have to stay on top of it. But if you want to get yourself an avic, but you don't want to get a fragile spiderling, get yourself a juvenile, or even a sub-adult, and you can still watch it grow a bit, but you don't have that worry of it being quite so fragile. But I hope you've enjoyed the video today anyway. Thank you for watching, and if you do like it, give me a thumbs up, maybe consider subscribing, and you'll see me again soon.